We've all been taught through movies that if you blow a hole through the side of a plane while it's flying, you'd better hold on tight. But that's not really how it happened when Alaska Air Flight 1282 had a door plug blow off, creating this gaping hole with people sitting literally feet away. So let me explain what happens when a plane in midair experiences this rapid depressurization and how everyone managed to survive.
And it was a trip from hell.
So this was a relatively short flight. It's only about 2 hours from Portland, Oregon to Ontario, California. So this Boeing 737 MAX 9 takes off at around 5 p.m., 171 passengers on board, plus 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants. Now, according to flight data, the plane climbs to about 16,000 feet, which, isn't that high. This is maybe like 10 minutes into the flight when there's a disaster in row 26.
Center Alaska, Trouble 2, we're declaring emergency. We're descending down to 10,000. Depressurized.
Depressurized, meaning a section of the plane's fuselage blew off, right near the back rows. A door plug, which is basically just like a big panel with a window that replaces the emergency exit when you don't need one there. It tears right off the plane. So here's a diagram from Boeing of how the door plug works. So from the inside, you probably wouldn't even notice it's there because it looks like every other part of the plane. But it's meant to stay sealed, even in an emergency. Like, it's not supposed to open. And you see these stop fittings, there are 12 of them, 6 on either side, basically matching holes on the door plug and the frame of the plane.
And these line up. And the purpose of a stop fitting is to prevent that door plug from being pushed out of the airframe.
I've heard it described like one of those old bank vaults with the extending metal pins. The stop fittings are what physically hold the door plug in place.
So the question is, if the door came off, the stop pads don't show any damage in the pictures, how did the door rise up? And because there are 4 retaining bolts that hold it there, were those bolts installed? Were they installed properly? Did they have the proper washers and lock nuts? And were they properly safety?
Now, the NTSB is investigating to understand why or how that mechanism failed. But when it did, it would have been very loud.
We had no idea what was going on. I truly thought it was the engine. I thought an engine had blown out, a wing had gone down. Like, that's how loud and jolting that second was, that I thought we were going to nosedive at any second.
And that's when all hell breaks loose. A few things happen when you have this sudden loss of cabin pressure. First, things do get sucked out of the hole.
There was, I guess, a boy and his mother were sitting in that row, and his shirt was sucked off him and out of the plane.
According to the NTSB, even parts of the seats were sucked out.
The headrests on 25A and 26A were gone. The seat back on 26A is also missing. The tray table on the back of 26A is also missing.
The force of decompression was apparently so strong, even the cockpit door, like where the pilots are, flung wide open.
The first officer lost her headset at that moment. It was pulled off.
So at this point, thank goodness the bolts holding down all the seats were sturdy, because even the seats in row 26 were torqued sideways. It also quickly would have become very cold in the plane. The air at that elevation is literally freezing. Plus, it's rushing in at hundreds of kilometers an hour. But assuming everyone stays in their seats, the next greatest threat is a lack of breathable air.
The risk they're trying to manage there is making sure they don't become hypoxic. If they don't get enough oxygen, then that can start to lead to bad decisions and worse.
All of the pressurized, breathable air rushes out of the plane, and in comes much thinner air. So it's like, imagine one moment you're walking to the grocery store. The next moment, you're halfway up Mount Everest. There's this often cited paper from 1963 measuring how much time of useful consciousness a person has at any given altitude. So at 50,000 feet, if you're breathing that air, you've got 6 to 9 seconds. Even at 35,000 feet, which is a comfortable cruising altitude, you may have 30 to 60 seconds. This plane, at 16,000 feet, you might have as many as 30 minutes.
So it's not at cruising altitude, and actually most of us would cope okay at 16,000 feet of altitude, at least for a few minutes before we'd start to feel any effect on that.
Still, getting the plane down to a more breathable air pressure is priority number one, especially if the oxygen masks malfunction or not everyone gets one on quickly enough.
We just depressurized the center, maintain 10,000, and we need to return back to Portland.
And let's talk about those oxygen masks. They came down from the ceiling for the passengers, and the pilots would have had masks too, because when the air is that thin, it starts messing with your head. Hypoxia can make you confused, disoriented. After a while, you might not even be able to write your own name legibly, never mind fly a plane. And if you're really feeling the effects, you might just pass out altogether. So the pilots put on their oxygen masks, stayed in control, and focused on the task at hand.
Last 1282, so you're ready for the approach now? You 28 left, okay?
We need about 10 minutes for Alaska 1282.
Alaska 1282, roger, just let me know when you're ready.
We'll let you know, Alaska 1282.
In the end, the plane touched down where it started, in Portland, Oregon, about 30 minutes after it took off. The flight crew hailed as heroes.
So there was a lot going on, and I just really want to, we want to thank the actions of the flight crew. That was equally heroic. The flight crew entirely did an excellent job. Thank you for that.
There were 3 babies on board, 4 unaccompanied children. And the flight attendants were said to have put their safety as their top priority through what was likely the most chaotic and dangerous flight they have ever experienced.
We don't often talk about psychological injury, but I'm sure that occurred here. We are very, very fortunate here that this didn't end up in something more tragic.
And that is very much worth keeping in mind. Remember, this was at a relatively low altitude when almost everyone was buckled into their seats. Imagine at a higher altitude with thinner air, seatbelt signs are off, people wandering about, flight attendants pushing drink carts down the aisles. What a rapid depressurization then would have done. Indeed, with no deaths, only a few minor injuries, this was very close to being the best possible outcome of a potentially catastrophic mid-air disaster.